negative on the emissions trading scheme to now being positive. And he said an issue that generated 1,000 letters a week a couple of years ago now produces 1. And so we're starting to see various leaders in various sectors emerge. Fonterra is one, not just on dairy here, but playing a crucial role in dairy internationally. I'll come back to them later. Air New Zealand is a leader on biofuels around the world. Zespri is by far the most advanced in terms of carbon footprinting and water footprinting its resources and driving these issues. We're obviously very good on renewable energy, and even very completely domestic businesses like New Zealand Post. New Zealand Post is brilliantly focused on fuel efficiency in its extensive transport fleet. So we're seeing a very big acceleration in investment in renewable energy. Again, data from Nick on Monday was that over the last 12 months, renewable electricity generation has hit a 12-year high at 79%, thanks, of course, to a pretty wet winter. And we're starting to see fuel switching. So I'm familiar, for example, down in Blenheim, a big switch by hot houses down there from coal-fired to wood chip fire. But generally speaking, it's only those large companies that are directly engaged in the ETS that are really driving these issues hard. There's still lots of work to get many more companies involved on this. Sorry, I'm not dealing with every word on every slide, but I put lots of words on every slide, so when you look back, you see some more. Forestry. Again, a huge turnaround, as you were very aware of, some of you even might have been doing it yourselves. There was massive deforestation, 40,000 hectares between, on a net basis, between 2005 and 2008, before the ETS started. Lots of people rushing to convert forests to dairy farms, for example, before they got hit by the ETS. And that's turned around. We're starting to see net new plantings, and we're starting to see, thanks to that policy stability, farmers starting to make money from the carbon. So forest companies like Ernslaw have been making some quite big carbon credit sales, typically to governments. So, for example, Norway has been the Norwegian government and the Dutch government have been big buyers of New Zealand's forest credits. Lots of issues to resolve in forestry, trying to persuade more small owners to opt into the system is a big issue, trying to get more certainty around permanent forest sinks, trying to encourage people to plant more natives. All of these things have a long way to go. But in global terms, and this is the other big area we're working on, we're trying to help the world arrive at forest pools whereby if you have grown a tree and stored some carbon in it, at the moment, as soon as you cut that tree down, you have to repay that credit unless you replant. What we really want to do is to get credit for the carbon that remains locked up in those wood products as they go into permanent use in buildings, for example. I'll give you an example of where that thinking's going. Down in Marlborough, up on the road to Havelock, Nelson Forests has a big mill, the Kaituna mill, and they were very early people in carbon footprinting that whole value chain from preparing land, planting seedlings, looking after those forests over decades, harvesting, transport, processing, getting the timber products out to market. They're already using that carbon footprinting, like Walkers with crisps in the UK, to find all sorts of greater efficiencies in what they're doing. But what they want to get to is to wonderful things like this. This is a 9-story apartment building in London, finished a couple of years ago. Only the ground floor is concrete. All the upper stories are wood panels made from very high technology engineered panels made by an Austrian company, KLH. And when companies like KLH can get credit for the carbon stored in those panels, that greatly enhances the economic value of those forest-based materials versus the likes of concrete, steel and brick, which consume huge energy to make those materials and thus release very large carbon in the process. So the picture for forestry in New Zealand is already turning around a bit, price-wise, for the timber, and carbon value on top of that. And once we get these international rules right, and we can start pushing down this kind of road, I'd feel an awful lot more confident long-term about forestry in New Zealand. I mentioned Zespri. They did their first carbon footprint back in 2009. As I said, they've now done water as well. Their issue is very different from either sheep or lamb farmers, in that, in fact, at the production phase, in the orchard, they're actually storing carbon. They don't have animals that are producing greenhouse gases. So their issue is that they would, of course, like to get credit for that carbon they're storing. That will eventually come. But they're very focused on the energy issue all the way through. So, for example, they are doing things like trialling flying kites off the front of ships that take kiwi fruit to market as a way of saving fuels. And the early results show that on average they might be able to save about a fifth of their fuel bill that way, and of course save the greenhouse gas emissions. Zespri's very impressive all the way through that value chain in its terms of its innovation. The end result of all of that innovation, not just around these climate issues, is that they've really started to de-commoditize the fruit. So if you walk into a supermarket in the UK, I always love doing this when I'm on my travels, and pick up a Chilean or Italian kiwi fruit and pick up a Zespri, the premium for the Zespri can be between 40 and 100%, depending on the season. And people are actually buying Zespris as opposed to just buying kiwi fruit. Farming engagement. Obviously, the biggest area is around the dairy industry because it's our largest single earner of foreign exchange and our largest single producer of greenhouse gases. But it's really important to think of this not narrowly in terms of an environmental issue about the greenhouse gases, but the much bigger picture of how does the dairy industry grow volume, grow value, so it can continue to play a leading role in the economy. How can it do that in environmentally responsible and sustainable ways? And crucially, how can it do that in competition with lower cost producers overseas? Because here in New Zealand, we ceased probably about 10 years ago about being a low-cost producer of dairy. So, for example, I visited such a farm in the US, owned by a New Zealand farming family in Missouri. The land cost them 1/4 the price of land in the Waikato. This is very good pastoral dairy land in Missouri. They're paid more for their milk than they are in New Zealand, and they pay no money in capital into the co-op. So these are the sorts of big economic drivers that are around. Sheep and beef farmers have many of those same issues about how can they contribute to really growing the New Zealand economy. The negative side of all this is that federated farmers so far has been extremely negative about all this. Crucially though, only at a national political level, but led by the last two presidents of federated farmers. I was always aware, travelling around the country, because I spent a lot of time in the primary sector, that at a local and provincial level, there was much more enlightened thinking going on. And in fact, the big changeover in board members of the National Board of Federated Farmers at the annual meeting in Rotorua a couple of weeks ago has brought in a very, very different bunch of people who I think are going to be a very constructive voice in these issues. So federated farmers at a national level is probably going to be more constructive in this, but in fact it's actually in dairy from a company level that Fonterra has been leading things very strongly. Now, The very big picture here is how might land use change if there is an emissions trading scheme affecting agriculture. And that's particularly a big issue for sheep and beef farmers because they, both in terms of the science and farm management, probably have at the moment fewer opportunities to do something to reduce emissions and increase their economic value in an ETS. Now, one organisation that's been trying to understand those changes in land use a lot is a Wellington research institute called MOTU. Susie Kerr is one of the main economists there. Now, Susie presented this material on Monday at our conference in Wellington. Susie's an old friend. We collaborate on various things, and she was very keen for me to show you some of her slides. Monday was the first public outing of this analysis, and in due course from MOTU there will be a full paper going into these issues. It's obviously incredibly difficult to work out over a long term how land use might change. So this is land use up until current times, and we can see already some big shifts. Land use out of sheep and beef, that's the orange one. Land into dairying, that's the red line. Green is a steady increase in forestry, and blue is a steady decline in scrub. So we know over time that those sort of big shifts are going on. And this is an attempt to model that out many more years. And there's a lot of pressure for land use change around the country. Again, I'll leave you to look back on the detail of that. A lot of it is, of course, bred, which is from sheep and beef into dairy. But you've got all sorts of land going in all sorts of different directions. One thing that's noticeable about this part of the country is, apart from some conversion for dairy in this area, these are much smaller, and they're small pockets of change rather than very big ones in other parts of the country. So the next stage in MOTU's work, and they spend a lot of time with their farm advisor groups around the country, is this is the impact of an emissions trading scheme where carbon is priced at $25 a tonne. And at the moment it's about 12. So that's before an ETS and that's after the ETS. So the dotted line represents the shift versus non-ETS. So indeed, there is some acceleration of that trend out of sheep and beef. There is a marked acceleration into forestry, and there is a very slight increase in dairy, and a good one is a decrease in scrubland because more of it is incentivized to go into forestry. If you try to, this is that same data, but looking at it this way, that's the difference between the baseline in terms of thousands of hectares versus an ETS. And so if we look out, say, almost 20 years, sheep and beef might be down about 250,000 hectares, and dairy up about 50,000, but forestry up about, say, about 350,000 hectares. So that gives you some flavour of where on current trends, and I hasten to add the science, the economics, the trends can change. That's what land use might look like. Let me just go focus a bit more now on the dairy industry. Last November in Auckland, New Zealand hosted the 2010 World Dairy Summit, organised by the International Dairy